If you had a headache or fever in 1982, you wanted to stay away from extra-strength Tylenol because you may have ended up dead. The new Netflix docuseries Cold Case, The Tylenol Murders, takes a look at the random and unique way a possible murderer took out victims. Chicago, 1982. At least 7 people die after ingesting cyanide-laced Tylenol capsules, sparking nationwide panic and one of the largest criminal investigations in U.S. history. Is there one mastermind behind these horrific deaths, or is that simply a convenient scapegoat in a darker conspiracy and potential cover-up? So, like many recent Netflix docs, this is a 3-part series with each of the episodes taking up about 40 minutes. Now, right off the bat, the interviewees point out a lot of assumptive perspectives that were in play during this investigation. Now, with our benefit of hindsight, and by hearing all of the different opinions, it's very easy to see how so many within law enforcement, families, and then journalists had tunnel vision, possibly reducing their ability to critically examine all the facts as they came. And you gotta remember, this case took place over 40 years ago, so the world is way more in tune with investigative approaches just thanks to all the true crime documentaries that are available to consume. Now, the world at that time also was much larger, lacking the instant communication and information we now have. So I'm not necessarily faulting those that were investigating or even how they handled the cases at the time, but we also don't get to see revised insight from them now, as they recall some of their actions. And there's no admission that they do some things differently. Perhaps not blindingly accepting certain accounts or overlooking potential evidence just because it didn't match their assumed timeline. Now, within the episodes, we get to hear from some of the victims' family members, and it's heartbreaking to hear how quickly their loved ones passed. One account from a firefighter, it's a bit harrowing, as he goes on repeated calls to the same address in a single day, all with terrible outcomes. Now, the personal accounts and the way they were affected adds a lot of humanity and depth to the interviews, balancing out the more cold or procedural accounts from law enforcement investigators. There's also an interview with the man authorities suspected of the poisonings, but could never prove. Now, his story in itself, it's wild and darkly disturbing. Almost an entire episode focuses on his background and how his sketchiness paints him as a suspect to investigators. Now, admittedly, the dude is weird, and he gives off this vibe that would make you cross the street if you encountered him. And a lot of that becomes reinforced once we get insight into his actions. But that doesn't mean this guy was the Tylenol murderer. This is where I think the authorities kind of fumbled big time. Maybe the guy is the perpetrator, but because they were hyper-focused on just him, they didn't fully investigate other avenues that plausibly could have been how the poisoning occurred. Now, for any of us that are suspicious of corporations and skeptical anytime they try to brush over a potential PR problem, Johnson & Johnson, the makers of Tylenol, they were extremely sketchy in their behaviors at that time. Like any corporation that's trying to protect their reputation, they got out in front of the scandal as quickly as possible and convincingly denied any possible involvement or contamination, while also setting themselves up as innovators in new safety and security when it came to drug and medicine packaging. And it's frustrating to watch as investigators simply just take J&J at their word and they don't fully explore the manufacturing process, where either contaminants could have made their way into the pills or somebody could have maliciously placed them there. The politics of big business and money, they're on full display, with one of the J&J execs actually getting the Presidential Medal of Freedom from Reagan for their implementation of new safety measures. Now, like with most cold case documentaries, there's not a ton of resolution that is uncovered when all is said and done. The series gives some great insight into how the deaths occurred, what specific poison was the cause, what types of changes these poisonings led to, but along with that insight, we also get a bunch of speculation and assumptions. Narrow focus and leaps in logic skew investigators' actions, potentially allowing the real culprit to escape. And even with all the interviews, including the primary suspect, who was not a good guy in the slightest, I'm not convinced there truly was a murderer on the loose who was tampering with random bottles of pills. Now, I'm curious about what you're going to think after hearing all of the conversations. And with my 2025 glasses on, I can certainly see how this could have been a manufacturing mistake that was then refocused and repositioned to become a PR win rather than a scandal for the sake of corporate greed. Now, obviously, I don't know if that is the case or not. And I'm just saying this to cover my butt. But as someone who was a kid at this time, I don't have much memory of this going on. So it was intriguing and informative just to hear about how easily medicine could have been tampered with back in the day, and then how these deaths led to industry-wide safety changes. And while the interviews are good at establishing the background for this, I found the deeper dive into the main suspect's life to be the most engaging and curious. There's a lot in his past that made him a decent suspect, but there's also a bunch of leaps that the investigation made to paint him as that suspect. There's no sex or nudity, some profanity, and some violent imagery. Now, as a reminder, I don't give couch ratings to documentaries, but for as frustrating as some of this docuseries can be, I did enjoy the information, and I do recommend giving it a go. I really want to know if you buy the accusations from law enforcement, or maybe just who you think is responsible for the deaths. Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this review, please give it a like. Also, don't forget to share and subscribe. I'm Chris. This is Movies and Munchies. Thanks for couching with me.